Welcome to In Her Voice, a podcast created for women who listen to and live by their deepest wisdom, their inner voice. This was made for you, the woman who feels pulled to more, to lead, to create, to dream, and to be a world changer. My name is Kelly Covert, and I am an inner voice coach. Join me here each week as we explore what it means to reach for your inspired potential, all while honoring your worthiness each and every day. Hello, this is Kelly, and you are listening to In Her Voice. Thanks for being here today with me. So I have a really amazing guest to share with you today. Amy White is on the show, and we are talking about how to reset and recharge your mind. And I think that this is so perfect for right now. It's the end of summer. We're getting geared up for school to start. And I've been hearing from so many people, I'm so tired. I'm so exhausted. I'm so ready for things to shift and to change. And I agree. It's just been a long haul, hasn't it? I mean, we've had a lot going on. There's a lot going on in the world, which weighs heavy on all of us. And Amy is here today to talk to us about how we can really own how we're feeling, both the physical and the emotional, and how we can reset and recharge. And I think that this is the perfect conversation for today. Let me tell you a little bit about Amy. Amy White is an international best-selling author, highly sought-after speaker, and intuitive medium on a mission to help individuals heal the past, discover personal truths, and thrive. Amy's one-on-one coaching, digital courses, and public talks allow audiences to gain a deeper understanding of the beliefs that are blocking their most authentic lives. Her insights and techniques help usher in big, bold changes and more subtle aha moments that lead us closer towards our dreams. That is true of this conversation too. You will have those aha moments, and they will be subtle and big. So sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with Amy. Amy White, I would like to welcome you to In Her Voice. Thanks so much for being here with me today.
Oh, it's such an honor and a privilege to be here with you.
Yeah, and I feel like we're talking about such a timely and important topic today, and that is how to reset and recharge your mind. And before we started recording, we were just chatting about how, particularly moms, particularly women right now, this is in April of 2021 that we're recording this. We're tired. We're exhausted. Our brains are like being pushed to their limits, and our bodies in the same regard with everything that's going on. And I'm really excited to dig into this with you. So why don't we start with this? Why are we so tired? I mean, I mentioned some of it, but I think it's deeper than that.
Well, it definitely is. And I just so appreciate this conversation. I think there's a couple of things that are going on. I think that, and you touched on it a little bit, we get very heady as women. I'll generalize because I know it's not just women, but I think as women, we're almost trained from a very young age or conditioned from a young age to really be heady, to think about how we act, how we're seen, how much we can do during the day. And so then you add in a pandemic and all that we've experienced over the last year or so. And it's hard, I think, for many of us not to be in our heads. But the big piece here is that when we're in our heads, we're disconnected from our body. And when we're disconnected from our body, we're almost denying an aspect of ourselves that helps us to find that place of reset. I think the body, our physical body, is such an amazing vehicle and antenna to our deeper wisdom that when we're disconnected from the body and we're in our head so much, we have a very hard time reconnecting or resetting and reconnecting. And of course we're exhausted. Our thinking minds are exhausted. Our heart mind, our soul mind is exhausted too. It's I've talked to a lot of clients over the past, year, and I'm surprised when people say that they're not exhausted, because that gives it an opening for great exploration of what's happening, because I think that there's something here about owning and acknowledging the exhaustion, not as a failure, but as a part of the process.
Ooh, I love that, owning the exhaustion, because I see women deal with the exhaustion in two ways, or approach it, maybe is a better word than deal. Either wear it as a badge of honor, like I earned this exhaustion, or to completely deny it. And I don't think either of those are serving us, do you?
No, I mean, absolutely not. And I love, like, I call it the red badge of courage, right? It's that thing where, and again, this goes back to the conditioning that somewhere along the line, many of us accepted this story that we have to be almost, or to be completely burned out to prove our worth, to prove our value, to show the world that we are doing everything that we can to be the perfect women and mothers and daughters and sisters and partners, and it becomes confusing for us, I think, many of us, as to, like, if I acknowledge this exhaustion, how does that look to other people? And that's where I think we start to play some mind games with ourselves, and as you said, like, that's where we get into that headspace of really beating ourselves into submission to continue to move about the world like everything's fine. I keep seeing these memes. Recently, it's like, it's fine, everything's fine, I'm fine. And
Yeah.
it's like, maybe, we can be open to the possibility that by acknowledging that things aren't fine for us in the moment, it gives us space to really assess, what do I need?
Mm.
Because we can't get to that reset until we can come into contact with what we really need. And many of
Right.
us need to, need some rest. Many of us need to get a break from the news, from social media, from, all of the noise externally, so that we can come into closer contact with what is it that's happening for us within us,
Mm-hmm.
and then act from there.
Mm-hmm. I want to go back to owning the exhaustion, because I think it's one thing to say that, own your exhaustion. Can you, like, show us what that looks like?
Yeah, I love that. So for me, and I'll speak for me, and I think it may be different for others, but for me, there's this there's this part of not owning the exhaustion that feels a lot like denial. And so when we deny any part of ourselves, or when I deny any part of myself, I'm disconnected from the whole. And so when I say owning the exhaustion, it's really an acknowledgement, and then grace and compassion for myself, that I'm in that space without the need to fix it, without the need to make it go away, but just to say, right now in this moment, I'm exhausted. And that can be okay. I often have this practice where I'll just put my hand on my heart when I'm dealing with something that's really challenging for me, and I'll just be like, you know what, baby, we got this. This is
Mm.
a real thing, and we're here. Like, I always talk to my inner being, or my, the younger self, the younger aspects of myself, that a lot of times the trauma or exhaustion or experience that I'm having is coming from, right? It's triggering that younger part of me. And I just really want myself to know, as crazy as that sounds, I've got my back.
Yeah.
That it doesn't, if I'm exhausted, it's okay. If I'm in grief, it's okay. One of the things that I really try very hard to be aware of is to not unpack my bags and move into the space of these heavier emotions. But I also don't want to deny them. and so that really is what owning it is for me. It's stopping in the moment and saying, you know what? I really am exhausted. And under this exhaustion is fear. And under this exhaustion is grief. And under this exhaustion is disappointment. And so really kind of just call it all by name. And then something about that actually allows some of the heaviness of that feeling to dissipate.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, like you said, it's just the acknowledgement of it. I think about when my kids were little and, like 3 or 4, and they were upset about something. What I would say to them is, I see that you're upset right now. I see that you're disappointed right now. Or, like you said, I would name it for them. And there's something really powerful, I think, about parenting, mothering ourselves in that way. It's so compassionate. And we know how to do it with our kids. And we just have to practice it on ourselves, because oftentimes the way we parent ourselves is so different. It's like beating ourselves up and judging ourselves and like saying things to ourselves we would never in a million years say to our kids. And it's so fascinating to me how we can get stuck in that place when really we do know how to do it. We've just never applied it to ourselves before.
Yeah. And even with that, I mean, I think there's so much grace and compassion that we can give towards ourselves, because many of us didn't have really good modeling.
Right.
I found in my own personal experience that the way that I parented my children was intentionally different than the way that I felt I was parented. Right.
Same.
And
Yep.
I'm sure that my children at some point will parent their kids differently than I parented them. Right. But there's something that, and I love what you were just saying, because it's so true. The way that I parented my children wasn't the way that I was reparenting myself, because to me, it was two very different things. I didn't realize for a long time, though, I mean, I certainly realize it now. But for a long time, as my children were growing up, that I could apply that same practice to them. And so very often when I feel like I have an energetic skinned knee, or when I'm feeling sad or in grief, or even if I don't know exactly what I'm feeling, but I know I'm feeling off, I picture like me lifting that younger aspect of me up onto my lap, and like what would that childlike part of me need if I was physically doing it. And it's like, oh man, I'd be rubbing her head and patting her back and letting her speak her truth about what's happening in that moment. And when I can apply that to myself, it is that owning that I was just talking about.
I love that visual of the little you sitting on your lap. That's really, really powerful, because like you said, there's so much grace and compassion there. So first step, and it's funny, we said we're not going to go into 4 steps of how to do things, and here I go. The first step, owning your exhaustion. But then what happens? What do we do next?
Yeah, I think that's where we allow the whatever needs to bubble up. So as I was saying a minute or so ago, when I can own the exhaustion, grief shows up, or disappointment shows up, or anger shows up. And so it's that next step is really, again, coming into contact with what's below the surface of this exhaustion, and not for the purpose of fixing it, but for the purpose of claiming it. And then sometimes it's not that we have to do anything, but to allow it to be present, even just for a few moments. Really, as I said, it starts to dissipate. Mm-hmm. And I think when it starts to dissipate, that's where we get the connection deeper between our head and our heart. Because as that overwhelmed feeling, or as those feelings start to dissipate just a little, it makes space for us to go, what do I really need right now? Man, I just need 5 minutes in the bathroom, away from the kids, where I can get a little bit of peace and quiet. Or I used to practice this when my kids were younger. I'd pull into the driveway, they'd jump out of the car and run in the house, and I'd sit in the car for just 5 minutes, listening to the end of a song or even in quiet, and just give myself that tiny bit of recharge. But I had to get to the place where I understood that I needed that before I could allow it to be part of my practice.
I love that allowing piece, because I think so often we think, oh, I don't want to feel that thing right now. I don't want to feel the grief right now. I don't want to feel the disappointment or the resentment or whatever. And so we just push it away. And when we do that, we're only delaying the feeling.
Well, agreed. And I think it's kind of like, springing a leak versus a volcano erupting.
Yeah.
But the other thing that I've found is that when we continuously deny our feelings, it's got to come out some way, and often it manifests itself in some kind of physical, experience, like burnout, or like some kind of autoimmune, or like some disease, or some kind of mental health challenge. And so it really is, it's like taking care of ourselves along the way, so that we don't get to a place where we manifest something so that we somehow have justification for that break. I'll give you a great example. I remember when my kids were little, and I would legitimately think, and I think back now and I'm like, wow. But, I would think if I could just, get sick enough that I have to be in bed, but not so sick, I could give myself permission to like sleep for an entire day. But then I realized, well, that's kind of extreme, right? It is extreme, not even kind of. But that was my thought process, because I was in a place when, especially then, and just in my own personal evolution, where I wasn't able to find a way to give myself a break that I needed. But then there was like outwardly, oh, if these things happen, then my break is justified.
Yeah.
But that's what happens when we start to deny our feelings, and maybe even we don't look at it like that example, but chances are we will end up manifesting something that doesn't need to be manifested if we can deal with it as things are coming up.
And I think that our physical exhaustion is a symptom. And it's, it's a red flag. It's like our body saying, hey, you better figure this out, because we can't sustain it. It's not sustainable.
Yeah, absolutely.
For us.
Absolutely. And I think as we start to put into practice this idea of coming into contact sooner and sooner, earlier and earlier in the process, with our feelings, with our emotions, with our needs for rest or respite, then we don't have to get to that place of exhaustion. I mean, when we get to exhaustion, our body's kind of like, a ticking time bomb of sorts, right? It's like, this is a really big message, but we don't have to let that happen, for us to start to put in place the things that keep us from going into that deep exhaustion.
I love that. And I love that you're talking about the mind-body connection, because I feel that often as women, they're very separate. There's like what my brain says, and then what everything else says. And there's not a connection, there's not a communication between the two of those. So I'm curious to know how you cultivate that connection day after day.
It's so important. I mean, our physical body is the antenna to our inner wisdom. And so to our soul knowing, right? Our soul wisdom. And so when we're disconnected from our body, we have a harder time connecting into our intuition. And so, which we all have access to. And so as I've really understood that over the last decade or so and put into practice coming into connection with my body, I actually do a very quick morning practice where I intentionally come into contact with my body as sort of the first thing that I do every day. And it's really easy. the first thing that I do is, as soon as I'm waking up, I intentionally pause and take, 5 to 7 deep breaths, like deep into my belly breath, just coming, like pulling all of my energy back into my body from sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And when I'm done with that and I'm ready to, roll out of bed, I stop as I'm rolling out of bed and I place my feet on the floor. And I really intentionally put my attention on my feet. And it's kind of, to me, like dropping a pin on a map, like I am here. So
Yeah.
it's that space of like coming into contact with my body in the moment, right? Being in the present and saying like, okay, here I am, feet on the floor, about to get out of bed and start my day in my body. And then
Yes.
the thing that I really love just before I, kind of launch into my day, whatever's next, is I set an intention, but not an intention of like something that I want to happen that day, but an intention of something that I want to feel in that day. So I often will say, please help, my intention is to remember when I'm disconnected from my body.
Mm.
Or I want to, be aware of today. I want to be aware of, my feet on the floor, my butt in my office chair, with the sun on my face, like things that can, like give me reminders of things that continue to bring me back into my body, and to be aware enough to recognize them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I love the idea of that. I do very similar things throughout the day. Like I am always trying to be aware and notice, okay, this is how I feel. This is what the sun feels like on my face. This is what the wind feels like. This is what I feel like. This is how I feel like my body needs to move right now. And that has also been for me a practice that I've built up over time. I don't think that when I first started, just setting that intention in the morning would have been enough for me to remember. I had to sort of set markers throughout my day to come back to that. And I think that's okay. There's perfection is not required here to make this work, right?
Yeah. And I think that's why they call it a practice. That's why I
Yep.
call it a practice. It's not because I'm looking for perfection, and it's enough for me to recognize it when I recognize it. And I think
Mm-hmm.
the more you do it, just like going to the gym and lifting weights, or, starting to, a running program, you don't go out the door and run 26 miles. You go out and you run, a half a mile, and you walk a half a mile. And so for me, it's the same type of thing. And some days I do it more often than others. And I try to give myself, and I really just, this grace and compassion is a running theme in my life. And it's give myself as much grace and compassion as I can to be exactly where I am.
To be exactly where I am. I love that so much. Let's talk about grace. It's one of my favorite words. I love it so much. As a recovering perfectionist, it has played such a powerful role in my life. And I would love to give you the opportunity to define what grace is to you, because I think a lot of people aren't familiar with what grace really is.
Yeah, I think for me, grace is the opportunity to give myself permission to be where I am at any moment, and to not be in that space of judging me, comparing myself to anyone else, comparing myself to the idea of perfectionist. I am also a recovering perfectionist, and probably a recovering type A plus 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 personality.
Same,
And
same.
so, so for me, it's really that again, and I do this often because I think that's something that's so important about like physically coming into physical contact with my own body, hand on the heart, and saying, it's okay right where you are. It's
Mm-hmm.
okay. It's okay that you don't feel like, that, conversation you had was the best that you could have been. Or it's okay that look around your house and there's still dishes in the sink, and you should have put them, away, or whatever. You should have cleaned up sooner. Like, it's okay. you're to be exactly where I am.
Yeah.
And that is it. I mean, that is
Mm-hmm.
grace to me. Um,
Mm-hmm.
in probably the biggest way that I can define it.
Mm-hmm. And it works. That's the thing that about grace that people might not realize is that when you practice grace with yourself, it literally changes you. It literally changes the way your thoughts run through your mind. I have a really fresh example. I took a picture the other day of my bedroom, of my bed, because my adorable dog had like made this little nest in the laundry that was on my bed. And she always makes nests everywhere. And so I thought it was so cute. I took a picture and I posted it on Instagram. And someone sent me a message. She was like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe you posted that picture of like your unmade bed with the unfolded laundry all over it." And I was like, "Oh wow, I didn't even think about that." Like that was not even on my radar because I live in a space where grace says you don't have to make your bed in order to be good enough. The laundry can sit in the basket, and that is not going to change who you are.
It's so true. It's so true. And just like we were talking a few minutes ago, this is a practice. I mean, this
Yeah.
has been a practice for me unraveling this really deep belief system that I had about where my worthiness lied, where my value resided, and how if I wasn't doing, especially for everyone else, that somehow I wasn't worthy of love and affection and even taking up space in the world.
Yeah.
But it's been a practice. And so often when we're starting to look at how do we bring in more grace and compassion in our lives, we are unraveling really old stories that were passed on to us, sometimes generation to generation, stories that we accepted as our truth as young children that really weren't our truth, but were a projection of someone, in authority or family of origin, or a teacher or clergy or something that we interpreted the story to mean to feel that we weren't worthy unless we were doing X, Y, and Z. And so it's not a switch flip for many of us. It's an intentional practice of catching ourselves when we're not practicing grace and compassion, and then lovingly, not judgingly, but lovingly redirecting the energy to say, oh, I hear that judgment voice again. And that's not okay, because I deserve love and compassion. I deserve to be in grace. I am good enough. And it's an intentional practice for many of us.
Mm-hmm. I know it is for me.
Yeah,
It
me
is for
too.
me too. And you speak of that judgy voice. We all have it. Every single one of us. And I think when I think about resetting and recharging my mind, a big part of that to me feels like finding quiet there. How do I find silence in my body and in my mind? And I'm curious to know for you if that is part of your practice, if that's something that you seek.
Silence is an interesting thing when we talk about this and finding silence. So for me, I have a very active brain. And so, which is lovely, right? It served me very well intellectually. I was in business, corporate business, for years and years. And so it really was a valuable tool for me. What I have learned is that for me, it's not about silence as much as it's about coming into partnership with that voice, so that it's not taking over, that it's part of the process. So
Mm.
as an intuitive, as a channel, part of my gift or my role is to be as open as I can to the information that's flowing through from the universe, so that I can share with my clients that information in the cleanest way possible. And so I tend to give my thinking mind a job so that
Yeah.
it's still, it has something to do, but it's not in the way of the work that I'm doing. And it's kind of an interesting way to look at it, but I tend to feel like it, for me especially, it's not about making it be quiet, because what happens is we get very heady again about that, and it's like judgy. Oh, I
Yeah.
should be silent, I should be quiet, I should be, and we should all over ourselves, and then of course we're not finding that respite or reset, because we're actually activating the conversation in our mind. But so what I tend to say to my thinking mind is, we're good. You kind of do your thing, whatever you need to do, but I'm going to let my heart mind take over right now. Like my heart mind, my soul mind, to be the louder aspect for me, or the more engaged aspect for me. And just by doing that rebalancing, it allows me to feel the reset. It allows me to feel that relaxation. So it's not in the quiet silence. It's in the balance of allowing, like, what's the more important aspect, or the more prominent aspect that serves me.
Yeah, I love that so much. I'm curious, do you have any, so for me, and I call this the heart voice, as you spoke of it, that's what I call my inner voice. And for me, journaling is a way that I can connect really quickly to that place. That's my favorite practice for listening to my inner voice. Do you have any favorite ways, or is it just, something that you can, go to whenever you need? How does that work for you?
Yeah, so journaling was my entry point into listening deeper to my intuition, for sure. One of the things that also, and I think this kind of goes back to the for me, the feeling that silence isn't in my highest when it comes to listening to my intuition. I find that movement is something where I get lots of downloads. So running, driving the car, actually, funny enough, is a place that I often get a lot of intuitive information. And I think part of it is because when I'm running, moving my body, when I'm driving the car, when I'm washing dishes, my brain is busy, right? It's
Right.
doing. And so and it's kind of that same, similar to the example I was just giving, like I give my brain a job, and it opens up space for me to connect deeper to my intuition, to my inner wisdom. And so I find that, I mean, right now, because this is really, it's such an integrated part of who I am, that I don't have to do a lot of any specific practice to connect or to listen. But when there's things that I'm really struggling with in my human experience, the journaling and the movement are the two places that I tend to be able to really hear what I need to hear, so that I can make the pivots that I need to make to come back into that space of grace.
Yeah, I can relate to that. For me, driving the car, same. And oftentimes I'm driving the car and listening to something else. And that's when I get like these hits. In fact, I can still remember many years ago, I was driving, I had just turned on the road that leads to my neighborhood. It was in the evening, and something was playing. I don't remember, a podcast or something. And I suddenly knew the name of this podcast. Like, it was like a lightning bolt to me. And that happens a lot to me. And I think that you're exactly right. Like, sort of giving the brain another job and not demanding it to behave a certain way, right?
Yeah.
Just say, you do you, and this is something you can focus on, and then allow whatever else comes up. That allowing piece is huge.
It's huge. And it's funny that you were just talking about that, driving into your neighborhood. I used to, when, as I was first opening up to my own inner wisdom, I would get these downloads while I was driving, to the point where I would pull over and grab a notebook, because I didn't want to miss it. And then I remember at one time saying to my guides, like, hey, could y'all just wait until I'm in a place that's safe, to give me this information? And so it was kind of this running joke internally of like, oh, here comes the down. Like I could feel it. It's almost like if you're of a certain age and you start to get hot flashes, it's kind of that same way that my downloads would come in, because I would start to feel like, what's that feeling? Oh, shoot, here comes the download. And I was able to get, to a place where I could really integrate it in a safe way, as opposed to trying to write and drive.
Right. I actually I use Voxer, the Voxer app, which is a voice messaging app, but I will Vox myself, which you can do like hands-free in the car. And so I'll send myself messages.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's something that I do often too, for the same reason, because I got so tired of like feeling worried that I was going to lose it, like that I would forget it by the time I got home or something like that. So yeah, make sure you have what you need.
Exactly. And it's funny, I'm laughing here to myself as you're saying this, because as I think back to the times when that was really happening, it was almost like before we had really good smartphones. I mean, so like the notebook was the thing, but
Right.
I love that because I have done the voice recording at times too. Like if I just need, like it comes through and I need to capture it.
Mm-hmm.
So it is really, but I've also realized this is the cool thing about developing a relationship with your inner being, is that you can say to your inner being, your soul mind, your soul being, hey, hold that thought. Let me get to a place where I can really, really embody the information in a way that's going to serve not just me, but others, if that's the purpose of it, or me, if that's the purpose of it. And my guidance will do that. If it's important, it's not going to miss me. But that, it can be a co-creation or a collaboration with our inner being, with our inner knowing, so that it doesn't have to be that sort of frenetic, like, oh my God, I'm going to miss this.
Yeah.
If it's for us, it won't go past us.
I love it, Amy. This is all so good. And I think taking all of this, like owning our exhaustion, allowing what we're feeling, allowing ourselves to feel it, to claim it, and to let it process through, and then really tapping into that inner voice, our heart voice, as you call it, our intuition. All of these things can really recharge not just our mind, but also our body. And if these are practices that we're bringing into our lives very intentionally and deliberately, I really believe, and I know this is true in my life, and it sounds like in yours too, that you will feel better.
And I would say that there's one thing that I want to, I guess, add to this conversation is that there's a lot of belief out there that if we focus on the negative, that we're going to bring more negative into our experience. And I would say that for me, and for those that I've worked with over the many, many years that I've been doing the work that I do, that it is in the acknowledging the feeling, it's in the owning of the emotions and the experience that actually allow us to clear through it. Mm-hmm. It doesn't bring more in unless we choose to unpack our bags and move in there and then keep telling that story. I'm exhausted, and not coming into contact with it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It's about like getting curious about that, right? Instead of just saying I'm exhausted, then sort of go deeper. Well, I wonder why. Why am I feeling this way? What else is there? That curiosity piece is very powerful. And I think also it moves us past the getting stuck there point.
Right.
So, it's very powerful in that regard. Amy, I could talk about this all day. I say that at almost the end of every interview that I do, but it's true. I love having deep conversations like this, and I'm so thankful that you are here today to do this with me and to share this space. And why don't you let our listeners know how they can connect with you online and learn more about what you do?
Yeah, the easiest way to find out all of the information about me is on my website. It's amywhite.co. And there, it gets into descriptions of the intuitive work and the channeling work and the mediumship work that I do, the energy healing. There's free videos. There's all kinds of fun stuff. And all the connections to my social media are there as well. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. So
all of the things.
All the things.
We'll put links to all of that in the show notes and on the podcast app that you're listening to, so you can hop on over and get connected with Amy. So last but not least, what these days is your inner voice saying to you?
Yeah, my inner voice is saying to me, trust the process.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one.
It's so good. It's so delicious.
Well, yeah, Amy, thank you again for your wisdom, for your time today. We so appreciate you.
Oh, thank you. This was lovely. I just really enjoyed this conversation, truly.
What I love most about what Amy and I talked about was how we use our bodies as a way to connect to ourselves. And if we are pushing aside our feelings of exhaustion, if we're denying all of that, we're also not listening to our inner voice. And that is what, more than anything, I want you to know. That if you listen to your inner voice, you will be happier, you will be more joyful, you will be more deeply connected to your intuition, to what you need and what your body needs. And all of those things help us feel exactly the way we want to feel. They keep us from coming out of alignment. They keep us from feeling dissatisfied in our lives. And that's not to say we're never going to feel that. That's not true. But I believe that we can feel that way most of the time. And those times when we're not feeling that way, we can quickly come back to ourselves if we have practiced this connection with our bodies and with our inner voice. So I hope that you can really put into practice some of the things that Amy talked about, the breathing exercise, the intention, setting of an intention. I think those are very powerful. And of course, I always love to hear from you. If you have feedback or comments about this episode or any episodes, please shoot me an email or connect with me on Instagram. I'm at Kelly J. Covert, and my email is kelly@kellycovert.com. And you can always shoot an email and let me know how you are and what's going on with you and what you're loving these days and what you would love to have more of, because those kinds of deep connections with you are a big reason why I do this work. Remember, you matter. You being rested and feeling whole makes a difference in this world. It is worth it to take the time to listen to your body and reset and recharge like Amy was showing us how to do. You deserve it. You are worthy.